Okay. Well, hi, good evening. I'm Andy Burt. We, along with Michelle Henkin, are the co-coordinators of the grassroots effort to pass the Pine Tree Amendment. Many of you, we have seen at events around the state. Some of you have testified on the amendment when it came up in the spring, and we're delighted to have you here tonight. The agenda for tonight is really pretty simple. We're very, very, very happy to have Maya Van Rossum, who has been the Delaware Riverkeeper for more than 26 years. She is the founder of Green Amendments for the Generations, of which the Pine Tree Amendment is a partner. And she is also an environmental rights lawyer and brings much wisdom and experience to this effort. So we're thrilled that she's here tonight. What we want to do is recognizing that some of you are planning to go to the polls to collect signatures on a letter, a district letter for us. It'll be in some districts that we've identified where we are hoping to really influence legislators to get this amendment across the finish line. And so the first part will be for Maya to kind of give an overview and some what this is all about, and then take some Q&A around questions that you may have. And then Michelle will finish up with just kind of giving some of the logistics that we have planned for Election Day. So Maya, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time for this tonight.
Oh, absolutely. And so as Andy knows and Michelle knows, I am super honored and proud and happy to be part of the Pine Tree Amendment Collaboration Coalition and really to advance this idea, this powerful pathway for environmental protection in the state of New Mexico, or state of Maine. So Andy already gave me a kind introduction, so I'll skip right over that. You know, and just acknowledge that we really are talking about a new pathway for protection in Maine, but also nationwide. And so I'm going to try to hit on a couple of things that I think might be helpful for you to know as you go forth in your outreach and your collaboration. I'm sure that you've seen the language of the Pine Tree Amendment about protecting the rights of all the people, including future generations, to a clean and healthy environment. So I won't dive into that. Hopefully you've seen the language many times over and really embrace it. But one of the things that you may be asked, and so I want to touch on in broad strokes, is really why do we need a Pine Tree Amendment in the state of Maine? Because there are many laws and policies and programs and regulations and permitting initiatives and all kinds of things in Maine that are focused on environmental protection. And I think the important thing that you may or may not incorporate in any answer that you have, but I always, for me, in terms of my learning, more is more. And then I can sort of pick and choose from that what I would like to share when I'm in a public conversation. So I'm going to give you a little bit more, but really just the basics. So one of the reasons why a Pine Tree Amendment and having an amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Maine Constitution, respecting and protecting the rights of all the people to a clean and healthy environment, is because in the state of Maine, like in all states across the US and at the national level, fundamentally the way the environmental protection laws are written is they're really much more focused on permitting and managing environmental pollution and degradation, sort of accepting them as a foregone conclusion, and focusing on permitting and managing pollution and degradation. Accepting pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion and focusing on issuing permitting that manages the pollution and degradation that's allowed to happen at the end of the decision-making process. The system of laws, regulations, legislations, policies, programs writ large in the state of Maine is not really focused on prevention of pollution and degradation from day one of the decision-making process by all government officials at every level of government. There are lots of gaps in the laws, so I'm sure that you've read a lot about PFAS and PFAS contamination, for example, that is impacting Maine dairy farmers and communities in the state. Well, that is a demonstration of a gap in the law where there is some major environmental harm or threat that's not being addressed by ongoing laws or regulations. And so we have gaps in the laws that are resulting in pollution and degradation. To the extent that there are good laws on the books, often there can be poor implementation depending upon who's in government or what are the available resources. And of course, there can also always be rollbacks in the laws, depending again on who's in political office. And environmental racism continues to be a problem in Maine, like in every state across the nation. Environmental racism is sort of built into the system of environmental protection laws that we have across the United States of America, and is an issue that results in really disproportionate impact to communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities. And so just by looking at the way the system of laws operates, the problems and the gaps in the laws in the state of Maine, we can see that there is a problem that needs to be addressed. But we don't have to understand looking at the laws that there's a problem. We can just look at what's happening on the ground, right? We can just look at the news headlines and we can see that people in the state of Maine are being impacted by pollution and degradation. And of course, we're all facing a climate crisis. So there too, when people say to you, well, why do we need something more in this state of Maine? You can either talk about the fact that there are deficiencies in the laws, the way they're written or they're implemented, or you can just talk about the fact that there continue to be environmental problems in the state of Maine, demonstrating that there truly is something missing, that there is a gap, a problem in the way the laws are written and implemented that needs reform. And so what we are here to suggest with the Pine Tree Amendment is that a big part of the something missing is that we are not recognizing and protecting environmental rights in the same powerful way we recognize and protect other fundamental rights we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, gun rights, and more. You can just think about how powerfully those other fundamental rights are protected because they are in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution. Well, if we were to raise up environmental rights to put them in the same place and space as these other fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution, then it translates, and it is reality, that then our environmental rights would be given the same highest legal stature, standing, and protection. Now, what we will get with the Pine Tree Amendment is truly meaningful constitutional recognition and protection. And I want to stress that we're talking about getting meaningful constitutional recognition and protection, because while most states across the nation talk about the environment in their constitutions, there are only 2 states, Pennsylvania and Montana, that give environmental rights that same highest legal standing as other fundamental rights. So not just any language will do when it comes to getting this highest constitutional protection. There are critical elements that are needed in order to accomplish that. And all of these elements are found in the Pine Tree Amendment. The amendment must be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. And that very literally, physically and legally puts environmental rights on par with other fundamental rights like free speech and freedom of religion, because it's in the same section of the Constitution. That Bill of Rights section of the Constitution is where you get the highest legal protection. And so by putting environmental rights there, where we find those other fundamental rights, we are very literally putting them on par with one another. It's important that the language recognizes the environmental rights of all people, including future generations, so that we have that long-term thinking as part of the decision-making process. It's important to be clear about the kinds of rights we're talking about, clean water and clean air. And it's also important that the language and its placement is what is called self-executing, meaning that the rights to clean water and clean air have and a healthy environment have legal standing and enforceability in their own right. You don't have to find some law that's implementing environmental protection. If you feel like your rights are being harmed, you can, and the laws, there's a gap in the laws, or the laws aren't doing the job necessary to protect you, you can turn to your constitutional right to seek and secure the protection that you're entitled to and that you need. And it's very important. One of the things that we get from the Pine Tree Amendment that's so important is that it applies to every government official, from the local town council to the legislators to the governor's office and all the regulatory agencies in between, as well as the courts. So this can be used as both a protection when government is overreaching, but it also can be used, for example, by municipal government officials as a tool of empowerment to strengthen their ability to protect the environment within their town council limits and for their constituents. Now, right now, there are states across the nation, there are a total of 14 states where there are Green Amendment proposals that fulfill all of these criteria. But Maine is very much a leader, and we have Michelle and Andy and Senator Maxman and Senator Bennett very much to credit for that, amongst others in the team. Maine's Pine Tree Amendment is bipartisan, and it is really on the cutting edge when it comes to both language as well as where it stands in the process. So it's just really important to know that people across the nation are looking at what's happening in Maine to decide whether or not they're going to be inspired by this pathway for environmental protection. And I think that's something to be really proud of. Now, I want to talk in broad strokes about what it might mean to have meaningful and enforceable constitutional recognition and protection of environmental rights in the state of Maine, to try to help you sort of anticipate some questions, but this is really broad strokes. So I'm expecting you're going to ask some very specific questions, and we'll dive into some hypotheticals when we get to Q&A. But I think the biggest thing for you to sort of internalize is that with the Pine Tree Amendment, environmental rights are given that same highest constitutional recognition and protection as those other fundamental rights. And so I just ask people to imagine, think about how powerfully the rights to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, even gun rights, how powerfully they're protected because they are in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. That same incredible power now comes to bear for the environment if the Pine Tree Amendment advances through the process and the people vote for it. Government does become one of the most powerful benefits of the Pine Tree Amendment, is that it really does refocus government decision-making so that it is focused on considering environmental protections, impacts, and benefits from day one of the decision-making process throughout the decision-making process. Again, regardless of who the government official is who's working to advance some law, regulation, permit, policy, or program. And it necessarily refocuses that government decision-making to one of prevention, rather than simply accepting pollution and degradation and thinking about what permit do I need to issue for it. It really gets government thinking about how can I prevent pollution? How can I prevent degradation? How can I prevent harm? And the reason why this happens is, just think about it. If your legislators are about to pass a piece of legislation that they know is going to infringe on private property rights or speech rights or gun rights, what is the first thing that they will do? What is the first thing that they're constitutionally bound to do? refocus their attention to think about, will there be an unconstitutional level of infringement? And if so, how can I write my law or advance my law in a way that will not result in an unconstitutional violation? Because infringement is prohibited by the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. Well, if the environment is now in the Bill of Rights section, that same thought process comes to bear. Government officials now must go to the beginning of the decision-making process and think, there's going to be pollution, degradation, and harm. How can I avoid that pollution and degradation and harm in order to avoid a potential infringement on the constitutional right? It just reorients the whole thought process, because all government officials have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect the rights of all the people. Informed decision-making is proving to be a critical part of a constitutional amendment of this kind, because in order for government officials to be able to demonstrate that they fulfilled their constitutional obligation and withstand a challenge, whether that challenge is through advocacy or litigation, they have to be able to demonstrate that they have engaged in thoughtful decision making, that they have considered the science, the impacts, the existing conditions, and what that means for their constitutional obligation to protect environmental rights. If an industrial operation comes in the door and says, give me a permit, and government officials say, well, according to this regulation, you're entitled to a permit in this space and this location, and that's the depth and the breadth of the constitutional analysis. And in fact, they end up permitting an industrial operation in an already overburdened environmental justice community, a community where there already is so many industrial operations and so much air pollution that people are already losing their health. And now government officials have issued another permit for another industrial operation, compounding those air quality problems. And they didn't look at the science, at the impacts, at the fact that this was the existing condition and adding this new industrial operation was going to compound the problem. Then when there is a challenge, that inevitable challenge by the people to say, look, you haven't done your due diligence to protect my constitutional right to clean air, the government is left flat-footed. They can't respond to that. And they can't demonstrate that they fulfilled their constitutional due diligence to protect environmental rights. And so necessarily that permit can be pulled back until government does their due diligence. And in the doing the due diligence, right, we may end up with a reformed decision-making, perhaps a denial, perhaps a permit, but that requires more stringent protections. I mean, any number of things. And we have seen that in both Pennsylvania and Montana when there have been challenges of that exact kind. The generational aspect of the Pine Tree Amendment is critically important because it makes very, very clear that present and future generations both have the same constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, and that government can't approach decision-making in a way that says, okay, we, the people here today, can use natural resources to the extent we want, and future generations get the leftovers. They have to reorient to say, we have to ensure a quality environment for future generations that is on par with the quality environment that present generations expect. And we have a recent decision out of the Pennsylvania courts from just a few weeks ago that makes that very point. It is clear with a Pine Tree Amendment, the way it's written and the way it's placed, that all government officials become duty bound to respect and protect the environmental right. Again, from the town council all the way up. It's not just left to the legislators to fulfill that constitutional obligation. Environmental justice is very strengthened by the Green Amendment because now government becomes duty bound. All government officials become constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomics, because we all now have the same constitutional right. And you can't say, well, we're going to sacrifice the rights of these people over and over and over again in order to protect everybody else, because that doesn't honor the constitutional rights of the people who are being sacrificed over and over and over again. So that's very powerful. So we can really say, I think with confidence, that environmental sacrifice zones start to become constitutionally prohibited with the Pine Tree Amendment. The Pine Tree Amendment does not wipe out existing laws, it strengthens them. It strengthens how they're interpreted and how they're applied to make sure that they are focused on protecting environmental rights as part of the implementation and interpretation process. So you can assure people our existing laws are still here to protect us. They're just strengthened and bolstered by the Pine Tree Amendment. As I mentioned earlier, if there are gaps in the laws, the Pine Tree Amendment can help fill them. So if you have an industrial threat or a chemical threat that's not yet covered by existing law, people can turn to the Pine Tree Amendment and their rights to clean water and clean air and a healthy environment to try to get protection from that unregulated threat. That might, and that gap in the law might exist because government officials have knowingly chosen not to act, and that's wrong. So we would want to have the constitutional right to help us. Or perhaps it's a new threat, PFAS contamination or fracking for gas from shale. These were new proposals at some point, and they were not regulated. And if you had the Pine Tree Amendment or have a Pine Tree Amendment, you can turn to the constitutional right while government scrambles to catch up, to fill the gap, right? So it really is very beneficial in giving legal protection in its own right. The goal of a Pine Tree Amendment is better decisions out of all government officials in the first place, but it is true that when government officials don't fulfill their constitutional obligation to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably, then people can get access to the courts to try to vindicate their environmental rights. Many people are going to say to you that this could result in a rush of litigation, that the Maine legal system is going to be overwhelmed by legal challenges. You can assure people that that is not the situation in the two states where we have constitutional rights of this kind. Number one, we don't see legal, like this massive onslaught of legal challenges for other Bill of Rights provisions. So we wouldn't expect to see that for a new Bill of Rights provision, whether it is environmentally oriented or otherwise. In Pennsylvania and Montana, the two states that have a Green Amendment, the number of cases that have been brought and dismissed as being frivolous based on a constitutional environmental right of this kind has been zero frivolous lawsuits. The number of lawsuits overall that have been brought and been allowed to go forth because they are not in fact frivolous, the number of cases based on an amendment of this kind has been 3 to 9 cases a year. Given the number of environmental cases that are brought in a state in any given year, that's not that many. The Pine Tree Amendment is about a check on governmental authority. It's about how the government wields its power. It does not result in nor allow for constitutional challenges between neighbors. So one neighbor is not going to sue another neighbor, person, industry, farmer, or otherwise, and say they're violating my constitutional right. Because fundamentally, the Constitution is about, and the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution is about governmental authority. So this is a check on government power. Again, it's not about battles between neighbors. People will say, well, gosh, this language is really broad. What is clean water and what is clean air? And you can assure people that the language in the Pine Tree Amendment is similar to the kinds of language used in other amendments in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. For example, other provisions talk about no excessive bails or fines, or the need for just compensation for property taking, or grant the right to freely speak. These are all pretty broad terms. right? The right to clean water and clean air is on par with this kind of terminology. So it's perfectly appropriate in the constitutional context. And the way these terms are going to be defined is the same way procedurally that other Bill of Rights terms are defined. It's going to be up to the legislative branch and the executive branch through the passage of laws and regulations and the issuance of permits to, in the first instance, help us define what clean water and clean air means in this context, in that context, in that context. And when they pass a law or a regulation or issue a permit and nobody challenges it, well, then it means that people agree that they got it right. And if they pass a law or a regulation that people think oversteps and misses the mark, then there might be a court challenge. And in that case, the court will use their standard principles of constitutional law and legal interpretation to determine whether or not government officials got it right or not. And they will either give it the stamp of approval or say government needs to go back to the drawing board and get it right. But there's a process, and the environmental rights language will follow that same process as language in other Bill of Rights provisions. The Pine Tree Amendment will not mean that environmental rights may never be infringed by government action, but it will ensure that it can only happen when there's a compelling state interest and government have made a demonstrated effort to minimize the level of harm or infringement. That is a constitutional standard. The Pine Tree Amendment is not intended to, nor is it expected to, undermine economic development in the state. It will simply make sure that it happens in a way that is environmentally protective while advancing the economic goals of whatever business operation is advancing. And you can talk with people about your own knowledge about the importance of Maine's environment economically, recreationally, and for quality of life, to just make the point that that is valuable and important. We want economic development, but we want economic development that doesn't harm people, doesn't harm the environment, doesn't undermine other important priorities in the state. And I think I'm going to leave it at that unless Andy and Michelle want me to go through some of the case examples, but I feel like maybe that was enough information for the kinds of activities that we're preparing for here.
Yeah, that sounds good, Maya.
Okay.
Great. So now is an opportunity for people who may have questions to raise questions, looking for clarification on some of the things that Maya talked about. And I think we have a fairly small group, so I'm thinking if people want to either use the hand raising button, that's at the bottom, I think, the reactions, or just raise your hand. If we can see you, raise your hand and we'll call on you. People have questions, or you can put them in the chat is another way. Margaret Marshall.
Hi there. I live in a quite conservative area, politically speaking. And I haven't ever done this kind of thing before. And if you have any tips on how to stay calm when someone comes at you with whatever they're going to come at you with, their own rights and things like that, I would really appreciate that.
So I didn't know if Michelle and Andy wanted to offer your advice first, or if you want me to offer mine.
You're the you probably have way more experience than we have, and we will jump in if we have additional thoughts.
Great.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really great point and question, Margaret. I think the first thing is, and I'm sure you're already prepared to do this, but I think I always can value being reminded of this, particularly in those difficult moments. One thing is to sort of take a deep breath and just listen to them. right? And let them say their piece. Because sometimes that really helps people. They just want to be heard. A second observation is to really talk about the fact that in the state of Maine, as well as in other states where this concept is advancing, it is advancing with bipartisan support. Meaningful bipartisan support in the legislature and beyond, because we all need clean water and clean air. We all value a healthy environment in the state of Maine for the economic benefits, right? The health and safety benefits, the protection from flooding and flood damages it provides. We're all harmed if our kids get cancer from too much pollution in the water or in the air. And you may, find your own words to say that kind of thing, but just sort of acknowledging that the environment really is not a partisan issue. And also perhaps even one of the things that I often do, it might not work quite as well in the modern era, but is to remind people that some of the most significant environmental progress legally that has happened in the US happened under Republican administrations, by President Nixon, by President Bush. And some of the most damaging environmental initiatives to be allowed to advance in the US happened under Democratic watch, like the advancement of fracking operations, right? So, and sort of saying these things in a way to acknowledge that there's good and bad on both sides, but when it ultimately comes down to, and then the only final thing is to say that very literally in Pennsylvania, sort of in no small part, the birthplace of this approach, the legal life was breathed into the Environmental Rights Amendment, the Green Amendment, as it's called in Pennsylvania, by one of the most conservative judges in the nation, because it is fundamentally based upon a conservative idea, the idea that the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution is about placing restraints on government authority. The Pine Tree Amendment is not giving Maine's government officials a grant of new or more power. It is doing exactly the opposite. It is the people of Maine saying to their government officials, when we give you permission to govern, we are outlining a series of rights that we, the people, hold unto ourselves, that we are telling you, you may not infringe upon, that are protected against government overreach. And we are now making clear that to that list are our rights to a clean and healthy environment. So fundamentally, at its core, this is a very conservative approach to environmental protection, conservative philosophically speaking.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's a very
I
good
wanted to
point.
just add on to that. What I've found, what I try to stress is, like Maya said, the bipartisan support, the fact that it's holding government accountable, and the fact that I like to say we see the economy and the environment in Maine as being intertwined. And so we feel like advancing this amendment will actually be a real benefit for the economy for years to come, and that's really important.
Thank you.
And I think it's also okay to realize you don't have to convince everybody, and if the goal is to get signatures on the petition, it's also okay to say, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts, and we can agree to disagree, and then just hope that they go away and someone else takes their place that goes, yeah, this is amazing, of course we need this.
Well,
I think, I was going to say, I think the other thing is that you will have the brochure that we prepared, and it may just offer them an opportunity to say, I hear your concerns, and if you're interested to learn more, here is some literature. And also you can go to our website where there's a lot of good information that you can delve into. And please be in touch with the Pine Tree Amendment. We're very eager to have conversations. This is a citizen powered effort here in Maine, where we're really looking at reclaiming balance in power.
If
So
they're going to get in touch, Andy, who did they get in touch with? Through the
we'll
website?
we'll give you that information. We're going to give you a packet that you can then give people the information, how to get in touch. I would say, you know, have them write to Pine Tree Amendment at Gmail.
Yeah,
And
and
we look at that every single day.
And then when there are questions we can't answer, we send them to Maya.
That's right. That's right.
She helps us.
I guess
And-
I'm thinking of this as a chance to educate people as much as to actually get signatures at this point.
Absolutely.
Because it's
Absolutely.
earlier until January. And if you can get people thinking and talking, then you can go back and say, they'll say, "Wait, I heard about that. Or
Right.
I've read your pamphlet or something," and
Yeah.
sign the letter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Great
thank
point.
you.
Richard.
I understand the concept of protecting things as far as degradation and pollution and things like that. But as soon as we mention like the economy and stuff, it has something also, to me, it has something to do with accessibility. And I'm wondering if there's any, if that fits into it somehow. I mean, we want to save air, water and things, but we want to save our natural resources in Maine. But we don't want to just save them. We want them accessible to us somehow. But that's is that a whole separate question, or is that part of this question? Is having the rights to access something? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's an important concept, but I think that it would be hard to say that the Pine Tree Amendment is about ensuring access to natural areas. I mean, it sounds like you're talking sort of about recreational access. Am I understanding you correctly?
Well, to me, I was a fisherman, so that there's that sense, access to traditional fishing grounds, but also access to beaches we have problems with in Maine, and questions like legal questions like that, or access to shorelines and different.
Yeah.
You mentioned environmental tourism or something. That's not going to work unless you have an access for the tourists to get to this good environment or something, you know.
Yeah. So I think that might be a little bit more, in my opinion, about your personal approach for how you talk to it, or for how you talk about it. I think you cannot fairly say that the Pine Tree Amendment is going to be about giving, making sure people can get to the beach or get to the forest or have access in that way. But as you said, the only way that one can enjoy the values, whether it's recreational, quality of life, psychological, economic, or otherwise, to the natural resources that provide those benefits, is if we in fact do protect them. One thing, because you mentioned fishing, I do want to highlight for you, when you have the language in front of you, is one of the elements of the Pine Tree Amendment is protecting the cultural values of the environment. So to the extent, Richard, that to you, sort of the ability to fish, and that how fishing and, aquatic resources are really part of the life and the blood of many people in the state of Maine, to the point where it is deemed by many to be part of the culture of Maine. You can talk about the fact that the Pine Tree Amendment talks about protecting the cultural values of the environment, and that for a number of supporters of the Pine Tree Amendment, including Senator Bennett, that includes things like the historic fisheries of the state of Maine. Now, for others who, might have a think differently, or not, I don't want to say they're not mutually exclusive, but another way to interpret the cultural values of the environment and the that are protected by the Pine Tree Amendment language, is to think about indigenous Native American values to a clean and healthy environment, and that religious, spiritual, sacred connectivity that Native American communities have with their environment and aspects of their environment, and the sacred places and spaces, natural places and spaces in the environment. And so the cultural values of the environment, we believe, will be a very powerful tool to protect those cultural values as well. So I do want to highlight that in the cultural, but I do think, Richard, I think you're not going to be able to say that the Pine Tree Amendment is going to be able to make sure that you can actually walk onto the beach. That access is a different kind of issue, but you are going to be able to argue that the Pine Tree Amendment is going to be able to ensure that when you get to the beach, that it is a safe place and space ecologically for you to be.
And the cultural aspect certainly ties into the generational thing, both in both directions of future and past, I guess. Yeah.
Other questions?
I think Michelle had a contribution to the answer.
Well,
Angie?
no, actually, I have a question.
Okay, great.
I have a question, and I'm raising it because there is an amendment on the ballot, a right to food amendment on the ballot coming up. And so that's a topic of conversation here. And I think a lot of people are grappling with what it means to have a constitutional amendment on the ballot. So I feel like we may get questions that kind of derive from the questions about right to food. And I was listening to Maine calling yesterday. I haven't heard the whole thing, but what I gleaned from that is there were very conflicting statements being made by people opposing it and supporting it. What, on the one hand, they were saying, oh, federal laws would supersede, like, don't worry, because the federal laws protecting animal rights, let's say, will make sure that anything guaranteed in this constitutional right to food amendment will make sure there are no abuses against animals. That's one of the main concerns with that amendment. But don't worry, federal laws will make sure that there are no abuses carried out because of this amendment. And then another person was saying a constitutional right will supersede any current law in the state of Maine. I mean, it was like coming from all ends, and it got me thinking, I wonder with the pine tree, we've never talked about that. And so I don't know if that was a clear enough question to pose to you, but
yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And I think we may have talked about it, but using slightly different terminology. So either I'm going to be sharing something new that we haven't talked about, or perhaps I'm going to be reminding of things that we have talked about and giving a little bit of additional context so that it makes more sense, because and that it resonates better. So in the environmental context, right? What the way it operates between sort of the feds and the states is really the federal government generally puts in place the floor and says, this is the bare minimum level of protection you must give to the water or to the air. You cannot allow more pollution than this. So it could be a floor or a cap, depending on which direction you're going. You can't take more water than this, right? But it provides the minimum level of protection. And then the states are entitled to do as much more as they want to over and above that. Okay? And so that is sort of the way the environmental protection laws in this nation are very much structured to be a partnership between state government and federal government. Again, with the feds generally providing the bare minimum and the states allowed to do better. And that's where the Pine Tree Amendment comes into it, because this is really about the states doing better. And so that while the Clean Water Act allows significant levels of pollution to be added to the water, or contamination to the air, or harms to wildlife ecosystems and populations, etc., State laws often are more protective. This constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, I would suggest to you, is sort of the highest bar of protection and makes sure that all of the state laws are being interpreted in a way that is even more protective than perhaps they're being interpreted now, and is in that space above federal law. Now there are, and so the same, will be with food. The same plays out in other areas of government, but there may not be as much partnership between the state and the federal laws. Again, the environmental protection laws are designed to be implemented that way from their original genesis. I don't know food exactly, but I think there are many areas of the law that are similar. Now, that being said, there are times, there are places and spaces where the federal government does say, we are the be all end all on this. And so natural gas pipelines that travel between states is one of those areas. And it says all state and local authority, except that's being implemented pursuant to a federal law, but all state and local authority is preempted when it comes to these kinds of pipelines. And so in that context, the Pine Tree Amendment is only arguably, and we're still trying to establish that precedent, but is only beneficial in that little piece of space where state law applies through a federal law hook. Okay, so I think probably in food, it's the same, that, they're just trying to talk about the relationship between state and federal law.
I'll keep this brief because I don't want to distract, but I do think it may come up. I think it may be on people's minds at the polls. I think maybe what they were trying to be reassuring and say, that minimum floor you're talking about, there are federal laws that govern how animal welfare, and that is the floor, and
Yes.
it doesn't matter what's happening in the state of Maine. You cannot
Correct.
treat animals less well than that. So don't worry that this right to food amendment is going to mean that you can abuse your horses, because you can't. The federal law states that is not acceptable. That's
the federal right. The federal law gives the bare minimum level of protection, with the states allowed to do better. And so, we're going to be thinking more in the wildlife context.
Right.
So, if there are protections for an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, somehow having this constitutional, you're not going to suddenly be able to take animals and kill them all over the place.
Right.
And
you can't do worse. You're not allowed.
Right. The feds the federal is the floor. And again, sometimes the floor is you can't go below, sometimes you can't go above, but you can't do worse then.
Okay. I'll stop there. And
does that help clarify that? Because I do think you're right. And I think it's important also to help people to understand that there are parallels in different areas of the law, but we really are focused on the environment here. And one of the values added for food protection, of course, is protecting the quality of the environment and the soils and the water. That, of course, creates the food that people need to eat. So if somebody's really food oriented, you can talk about the benefits of the Pine Tree Amendment for food production and protecting the bees and the pollinators and all that good stuff.
Great. Are there, okay, Chuck?
How bipartisan is our campaign? How many Republican representatives, House members do we have? I know how many we need approximately, but I don't know approximately how many we have.
We haven't identified them conclusively. We know we have at least 2 for sure. We have indication of in the House. In the Senate, we had 5 that were lined up saying they would vote for it. 2 are sponsors, 2 senators are sponsoring, and then there were 3 other Republicans and maybe 4 that were going to vote yes when the vote when they have the vote. In the House, we had at one point as many as 5 or 6 that were saying they would vote for it. Some were absent when the vote was called, and so we're not sure yet.
I see.
So it's not like hugely bipartisan, but it is bipartisan.
Yeah, I
And
just
Rick
wanted to.
You don't
We
need to
don't
go
have to
there,
get
right?
into
You
it.
just say
No,
it's
no, no.
bipartisan.
Yeah.
It's,
And-
it's
and
better
Rick
I didn't
Bennett-
know.
Yeah, and Rick Bennett is eloquent about, I mean, he is a Republican senator from Oxford County, and he is wonderful to listen to about the need for the Pine Tree Amendment and why it's so appropriate for the state of Maine. So,
And so Chuck, and the way that I would emphasize that, just to add a little bit, is to say that it's bipartisan and that the 2 primary sponsors in the Senate, one is a Democrat and one is a Republican. So right at the leadership level, you have bipartisan support. And if you focus on that, that often gives people comfort. And you don't need to go into the actual numbers. And you can always say you don't actually know what the actual count is, because you don't. Because
Because we
you've given
don't.
some idea, but not the exact number. So you can honestly say, I don't know, but I know it's at the leadership level on down.
I think another thing to emphasize is one of the things that we learned by being at the State House when we were finally allowed in and could have conversations is that the legislators were really interested in the concept. They realized that it was big, that it was really would be a paradigm shift. They want more information. And that's one of the things that we are with Rick Bennett and Chloe Maxman and some other folks are trying to have some of those conversations to say, what are your questions? So I feel that there is an interest and a willingness to be open to what this is about. And I think that's a very good message that we can give to people at the polls also, as they may want to learn more about it, because it is something new and exciting. And how do I wrap my arms around it? I feel like in my heart, this is right, but gee, I have these few questions. And that's the sort of thing that we also will be having some more educational sessions with Maya and are very willing to really talk these things through, which is, you know, what grassroots to me is really about, is coming to a place where we are more on board. All right, are there other questions, folks who are here?
Margaret has a question. Doretta, I think you had a question too?
Let Doretta go. I can ask mine some other time.
And mine was just a comment. I appreciated Maya sort of taking the right to food that's coming up now and sort of kind of not uniting them, but giving a sense that they almost feed off each other. Because I guess one of my thoughts was, are people going to say, what are we doing? Just adding all these things as constitutional rights, you know? And might be a bit of reluctance, because it seems like we're just trying to change the whole system. So that helped me sort of formulate a way to address that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Doretta.
When I hear right to food, the first thing I think of is right to not starve. But that's not what it is.
Right, true, yeah.
Margaret? Yeah.
I was just wondering if Maya or somebody else could, like, if we had a real example to give to people, like the Poland Springs or Nestle taking water, how would a state amendment help with that?
So I think the question becomes whether you want a real Maine example or you want a real example elsewhere. There is a little bit of it can be a little bit hazardous to try to take a Maine example where we're sort of hypothetically visioning out all the aspects because there are so many aspects. And to be honest with you, I can, in my mind's eye, come up with how it would work in that context, but not having all the ins and outs of the precise water withdrawal spot that you're talking about, there's a little bit of peril. But I think what you can say is real world examples. How has this helped? You can say that in Pennsylvania, the people of Pennsylvania were able to use their what's called a green amendment, their amendment to challenge a law that gave the fracking industry automatic waivers from environmental protection standards that apply to all other industries, and that undermined local zoning authority and mandated that drilling be allowed to happen everywhere, including as close as 300 feet from people's homes. That in Montana, their green amendment has been used to require the rescission or to result in the rescission or the voiding of permits that were given to industrial gold mining operations that would have had very serious ramifications on natural resources, including resources outside of and connected with Yellowstone National Park. And as a result, the regulatory agency would have been required to go back and engage in a thorough permit review process that considered science and impacts, which is something that they overlooked, right? They just checked the boxes. You can say that in Montana, the Green Amendment was used by the state to protect the state from having to enforce some contractual obligations that if implemented, it was drilling of test wells for drinking water, that if implemented would have contaminated the drinking water supply of an entire town. And because of Montana's Green Amendment, the state did not have to enforce that obligation. And so the town's drinking water was protected. Those are sort of three, and that right now, or recently, a municipality, so thinking about the importance of municipal power in Maine, a municipality in significant reliance on the Green Amendment rendered a decision against a development project that would have resulted in the destruction of the last stand of woodlands in an urbanizing town. And one more example to show how it can proactively be used, because the Green Amendment isn't just about stopping bad stuff, but it's also about advancing good things. So we have a situation in Pennsylvania where there's a highly toxic site with a spreading pollution plume, where for over 30 years, the state government did nothing to clean up this site, despite knowing of the toxic condition and the existence of responsible parties and a law that allowed them to enforce cleanup, but they didn't do anything. Now, using the Green Amendment, we're securing cleanup by the responsible parties, but through government, through the government enforcing existing laws, and government officials, from legislators who are trying to pass good laws to the state attorney general who's trying to enforce existing laws against polluters, are relying on those states' amendments as the foundation for their good, positive efforts, right? So you can think about it's protection as well as, proactive benefit, whether it's advancing good laws or good activities when government has failed to do so.
Thank you.
Great, great. Well, I am aware that it is 8:03. This has been really fantastic. I kind of hate to stop it, but I also feel we said we would do this for an hour, and we still need a few minutes to just give people an overview, some logistics. If people are planning to go to the polls in some districts to collect signatures on a letter. So Michelle is going to talk about that. I want to just thank Maya for, again, for being here with us tonight, giving such a great presentation and helping us to continue to be clear about the implications and the questions that may come up. It's been really a wonderful insights to this as we all prepare to go. I guess one of the things I want to say is that, if questions do come up on election day at the polls that you really don't know the answer, the best thing is to say, I'll give me a way we can contact you and we'll get you an answer. So we've really made a point of trying to do that for people. So Michelle, do you want to take it away?
Yes, absolutely. So, hi, I am also incredibly grateful for all of you being here. And we plan this as a way to give people some ideas of how to answer questions at the polls. It's obviously also just a wonderful way to educate all of us even further. I've listened to Maya countless times, and it helps so much to help me be comfortable when people approach me with questions. I would like to invite anybody that feels inspired and excited to head to the polls to help us on election day to put their name in the chat just to confirm that that's something you're interested in. And if you could also, we have your contact info, but let us know the best way to contact you, because what we would like to do is see where people are from and then figure out what towns would be really helpful for people to go to that would be near them. It'll involve getting in touch with you to find out how far you're willing to travel and, and what would make sense for you on that day. But we're hoping that people could go to the polls from 4 to 7. That would be the ideal time to show up. If another time is better for you because of your schedule, we are grateful for any time you can offer. But we're thinking 4 to 7 is probably prime time for people getting off of work and heading home and having some time to have to sign something, have a conversation, and learn more about the amendment. We will also be getting, once we define which towns people will be gathering signatures in, we will call the town clerks and find out what kind of accommodations they're able to make. We understand every town is different. Some will provide you with a table, some will let you be inside, some only want you, outside, and you bring your own table if you want one. We think everybody should have a clipboard. So if you don't have a clipboard, we would provide you with one. We would be providing everybody with a stack of brochures so that they can give people something to refer to and to learn from. And we'll provide you with copies of what we're calling our district letter. And our district letter is basically a very simple letter to the representative of that town, that district, saying, we, the undersigned, constituents of yours, would like you to vote for the Pine Tree Amendment. So it's not any great oratory. It's just a way to collect people's name, town, and email if they'd like to share it with us, so that we can show these representatives. We are choosing the districts where there are representatives that we think are persuadable, that we can bring onto our side when the vote comes up in the House. Little background, we'll need 2/3 majority in the House and Senate. We're pretty confident we have it in the Senate. We don't have it yet in the House as far as we know. And so while Senator Maxman and Senator Bennett are doing their legislative navigating at the State House, we want to exert maximum pressure on those legislators and let them know that constituents do care. We have other strategies as well that we would love to share with you, and we'll be sharing in our newsletters and updates. But this district letter we feel like is really important in those key districts. And so if you also have friends that maybe couldn't make it tonight, we are recording this. And if we could reach 25 districts, I think we have enough people now to maybe get to at least 15 or 20. But if we have 25 Republicans in our, or they are all Republican, just say that, 25 representatives in our sites. And if we could get someone in one of their, someone in each of their towns, then we think that will be a great place to start gathering signatures. That signature gathering will be going on up till January or February when we finally are ready for the vote. So this is just our first effort, and we think you'll have the most people in one place on that day. So questions? I've just talked a lot.
So Michelle, you're going to contact the town clerks. I was planning on doing that, but
Oh, and yeah, I think when we contact the people that want to go to the polls, we can have that discussion. And yeah, you're absolutely welcome to take that off our plate. But we're also willing to do that if folks want us to. Yeah, and we're also going to have with the brochures, we will also have a nice sticker you can put on your shirt that says Pine Tree Amendment and your name, so that people know you're official. And this is not a standard petition. This is not something that's going to get notarized, that you have to be really careful about. In fact, we want people to print their name and their town. Well, you'll know the town. We want people to print the name so that we can read it clearly, because we're going to be inputting it and basically sending a letter with all these names typewritten. We will also have these letters online digitally that people can send to people that they know. Their names will be added. There'll be other places and times that these letters will be circulated.
and if people don't want to put their email in, it's okay for them to just have the
They-
name of the town.
They don't have to, but if
Mhm.
they'd like to be on our newsletter, yeah, then getting their email is great. Yeah, Doretta?
Yeah, for our representative, my representative, I know has 4 towns.
Uh-huh.
So I'd be in Waterford. Are you already connecting with people in those other 3 towns, which would be Norway, West Paris, and
Well,
and Sweden?
right.
So,
I'm
or I
going-
can, if I know people, I could do that on your behalf.
Absolutely, and I'll be in Norway next week.
Yeah.
Before the election, so I may find somebody, but
Good.
yes, absolutely. And this, as I said, this will be recorded, and hopefully that will give
Mhm.
people enough background that they feel comfortable. The fact is, a large number of people just feel really comfortable right away, going, "What a great idea," and they'll sign it. And then you've got people that end up supporting it, but have a lot of really thoughtful questions, and they're skeptical and they wonder what the impacts will be. And that's fair too. There's not going to be a lot of time at the polls to engage in deep
Mm.
discussions.
Sometimes the people who really want to talk about the details end up not signing. They say, oh, well, food for thought, I'll think about it. Yeah.
So you can give them a pamphlet and say, yeah,
Yeah, there you
check
go.
us out later if you think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Hi, Rich.
Any other, Andy, have I forgotten? Oh, I guess one other thing we talked about is it's really good just to have a nice like a nice thing to call out to people as they wander by. We've been told by folks at Green Amendments that they find people respond really well to things like, are you interested in securing the right to clean air and clean water? Because you're going to need something pretty short and to grab their attention. Or securing a constitutional right to clean air and clean water.
We will, I think you said this, although I pulled my earplugs out for a minute, that we are going to provide a sign that we have been doing yard signs of lawn art, and very eye-catching, and it tends to pique people's curiosity and bring them over. So we will provide a lawn sign for people to have as you're doing the signature gathering. I think that's it. We will be in touch. I've got names and I know we're gonna also save the chat, so we'll have that as a backup. And it's been wonderful to have people here tonight, to have this great interest. We are building great momentum. We're very excited to have representatives here from Sunrise Bates, and it's really what has excited me about this amendment very much so is the intergenerational and the future generation aspect of this piece of legislation. So often we're just looking at what is the bottom line in 6 months. So this is really opening up new eyes and new horizons, I think, for protecting our environment. So
Yeah. Has everybody had a chance to put their name in the chat if they want to be contacted to go to the polls? Looks good. Thank you
great.
so much, everybody. It's like wind in our sails when we're surrounded by other folks ready to jump in on this. We're so grateful.
Yeah. Everyone have a good night. Thanks again, Maya, for
Thank you,
being
Maya.
with us. Really appreciate it. And pay attention, folks. The Green Amendment is up for a vote in New York State, and we'll be helping to push it across the finish line.
Absolutely. All the synergy is value added. So what happens in one state helps another. So awesome.
Great, great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody. You're wonderful.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Good night.
Thanks.